Fast forward several days, and this is where we are. The majority of the back of the vehicle, so from the fuel tank area backwards, is now either bare metalled or scuffed, where we had stained seam sealer previously from somebody's sort of Schultzing efforts, and with that also comes a lot of corrosion removal and protection. So you can see that the rear arches have been scuffed, not needing to go quite back to bare metal, just to actually remove the waxy Schultz that had been applied in that area, and lots of other areas that have had corrosion taken off and are in a part state of preparation. So first of all, the battery box area, that's had that typical bracket taken off here. You can see how even underneath the bracket, the pitting effect where the corrosion had been eating the battery box tray, not just the bracket that we've removed, that's been going on, but it's actually still stable. It's not a lost cause. This battery tray is perfectly stable to reuse once this is neutralized. And then also 2 brackets up there have been taken off as well. And then we go to the RACP. Now remember, at the rear of the car we didn't have any cracks, which is very unusual but very good. So this is because of obviously the later model design with the plastic brace in here. It's a low mileage car and an 06 build date. So no cracks at the rear. Spot weld work, there's some to do on the rear, but the main bits, we're part way through working now on the RACP work, are the front sections. You can see areas here that we haven't yet bare metaled, just left them to show what's going on in this process. So we found small semicircle cracks just around the mounting points here, where the pins tip and move and like that twist, and that cracks, puts a small semicircle crack in there. So what we do is stop drill the ends of it and the center, and then we do an incision line between those two, and then that releases this piece by the cracked curve nature of this section here, which we simply then remove, and then we fill that area up with weld, which not only solves the crack problem, but also allows us to penetrate weld into the threaded platform inside, which is the absolute point that you want to stabilize, and blend it over to the cavity, the RACP, this piece here. So that's again showing the cracked nature. That semicircle section round there is the crack. That's not a cut that we've made, that's the natural crack. So we'll just finish it off into that hole which dead ends it, remove that piece, and then do that repair process, also drilling out those affected spot welds. And then we'll move on to the Riedisch Motorsport reinforcement process, which actually is nowadays using the V3 plated repair. So we've got a new plate kit which is called the V3s. They'll be going on to the underside, so 4 mounting points plus the 2 spacers. Also, we've been working on the bracketry as well. Riedisch Motorsport have got new brackets that we've released, which are for the brake pipe bracket section, one that goes there, and also the fuel tank bracket there, along with a pair there, and then also the forward fuel tank brackets, which are here in this area here. Because they suffer with terrible corrosion, you can see the areas here which were pitted, which slightly, some of them are, we're still having to slightly thin down the metal, but at a reasonable level so that it doesn't become weak. And then that corrosion here where the fuel tank was rubbing against, and you can see where it had pitted, where the corrosion was building up on the steel. So good clean steel is this stuff here, and then pitted area is where all those little black blobs are. We still need to carry on and go round the back. You can still see, look how much was there. That gives you an example of the difference between the 2 sections. And obviously you still need to go along this front edge as well, because there's corrosion on the MIG welds just here along that section. The spring turrets or perches, they've been done, removed the corrosion on both sides. We still have to carry out our welding process on the left hand side rear, so where we've marked up from that line to that line, that'll get a full weld all the way through to stabilise the RACP to the wheel arch panel and take some of the load off of the spot welds, because there's one broken one there we've circled that we still need to do. As for other corrosion parts, you can see there's some of the areas on the top of the RACP that have had to be bare metalled, where there was a huge amount of stain in this sort of thing. But remember, if you scroll back through the video, it's a lot worse than that, where there was a chemical that had been applied over the brake pipes, but it had eaten into the BMW seam sealer, which made it unstable to paint over, and therefore lots more of it has to come off than would normally be needed, because traditionally the BMW seam sealer is very stable. As long as it's not got corrosion in, around or under it, it can remain in place. Then it's into the wheel arches. So turrets have been done, and you can see in the air there where it's obviously still corroded, where it hasn't been neutralised with a chemical like POR15 overnight, and then it picks back up with the corrosion colour, whereas a lot of the areas have remained bare metal because they've been coated. At the end of every day we will coat sections in a chemical called POR15 metal prep, which neutralises the corrosion and makes it stay bare metal rather than any corrosion sort of growing or bleeding back through. It's only a haze and it will come off very quickly within a few minutes work, but that's an area giving you an example of what it's like. So then going into the fuel tank area, we've still got some work to do down this seam sealer removal here, but majority of the area is prepped. So that's the fuel tank section brackets off. These are the front fuel tank section brackets that go in this position here. They always suffer with corrosion, so they have to be removed. You can see the pitting effect here on the bulkhead, so that will be again neutralised before we weld the new Riedisch Motorsport fuel tank brackets on. They'll be behind the contact patches and the 6 points of plug welding. They will be having a weld through primer both on the back of the brackets and the bulkhead. That's the same with all of the brackets that we'll re-weld on with new metal, along with the Riedisch V3 plates on the back of them. And then going further into it, the rear trailing arm pockets have been taken out and removed because they were suffering with corrosion. So that's a case of drilling out the spot welds, and there's one MIG weld to release, and then the new panels will be going in, and then they'll be obviously welded with plug welding processes and stitch welding, so they'll be arguably stronger, but also brand new metal, so it won't be corroded metal we'll be dealing with. Again, the contact patches will be coated with a weld through primer, and then later on through all of these grommet holes here and up here and here we'll be doing cavity wax processes to make sure all the back of any new panels are protected with a special wax. And then lots of small little detail corrosion removal jobs in this area here. This is the V-brace mounting box area. There's where the V-brace goes into. There's the rear jacking pad and then the seal. And this is where the wiring loom comes through for the ABS sensor. And this is where the little box is where the plug sits in. So lots of little bits of corrosion in there. At the moment we're working on this face. We've still got to go underneath the car, which we'll talk about later on. Outside on the seals we'll be working in a section in there later on. We're just going to be working on a right hand side trailing arm pocket. This one also has been removed, and lots of interesting findings behind there. We sometimes find little bits of cavity wax, which are obviously doing nothing major because it's just more of a dribble rather than actually a spray on any of the internal components. But from this side you also get to see the corrosion that's building up on the inside of the wheel arch grommet. So even though we can take it out on this side, traditionally you wouldn't necessarily be able to get to this side because there's a trailing arm pocket in there, but up here you can see that there is corrosion that needs some work and removal. And the same with corrosion in these joints. There's an interesting amount of corrosion underneath the seam sealer up in this area, which needs to be explored and found, but the risk is the more obviously you go into it, the more paint it will damage, because this is obviously body colour paint. So that's just a necessity. Sometimes it has to happen. The same with the panel between this piece and this piece. There's some corrosion shining in there, so we'll need to do some scraping and understand how far that goes. All the seamed edges, anything that is exposed or knocked sealer or any risk of slight corrosion developing, they've been taken off because we'll be reapplying that sealer. That gives you an example of what the turrets were like. So there's just a nasty dark corrosion that needs removing, which is growing. And elsewhere in this area, we still need to go underneath the car in the central sections. We've just started exploring those areas. For example, this area here, the V-brace mounting box, is hugely affected with corrosion. Hopefully a lot of that is surface corrosion, but when it overlaps a panel, it won't just go on its surface, it will grow in between. So in between this inner seal here and then this outer section, or the convertible strengthening seal, that will be corrosion in there likely, so that MIG weld might need removing and then teasing open to dig out corrosion and then shutting and re-welding. We'll see where we go once we've got the seam sealer removed to understand how much is in that area, but it's not nice to see, and it's a lot of the time it's hidden underneath the OEM seam sealer, much like this area here. These are areas we always tell people that there's a risk that there could be corrosion under. It's what we call the 25mm grommets in the central floor pan. There's one on each side, and they seem to corrode badly. Even though the corrosion isn't visible, it's hidden under the sealer. As soon as you take the seam sealer off, you find all these black pit-in dots, which is corrosion that's been living and eating the metal, and some of it becomes so unstable that it's then not a circle, it's not round, and you can see the rust that's sort of on the other side of the panel inside the car, and that there, what I'm pushing, is the bottom of the carpet. So it needs to be dealt with, because otherwise it will just carry on growing. So there's two ways to do this. Either it will enlarge the circle, and rather than a 25mm grommet, we might use something like a 35mm grommet, for example, if we can get a perfect circle by removing the affected metal. Or it might have to have fabrication and welding, but that adds more complications, because it's obviously welding work inside the car as well as underneath. So that means front seats out, and then the rear carpet and the center console out, so that we can have a clean access to get inside the vehicle, remove the sound deadening pads which are on top of these floor pan areas, and then cut this section out, fabricate a new piece, inset it, weld it from underneath, weld it from inside, paint and seal it. You know, by the time you've done two of those, and to a nice effect, into a restoration standard, you are looking at close to a day's worth of work. So it's definitely worth trying, first of all, seeing if it can be opened up to a slightly larger hole than it currently is, and then use a grommet exactly like BMW use. But that's exactly what's happening on this side. Not as bad, but we can see a little bit of black pitting, and just here is a hole that's just developed, even with delicate processes. So we need to go into that a little bit more. And then the underside section is still to be worked on. So we've just started coming into that area, as you can see by those grommets, but we've still got to go down the chassis legs and discover the corrosion present in the chassis leg and decide what to do with that, and also the transmission tunnel bracket and various other little parts across the car. So once we've got a little bit more carried out with the V3 reinforcement process, we'll post another update.